In 1983, one Soviet officer had 23 minutes to decide whether to end human civilization. His computer screens showed 5 American nuclear missiles heading toward Moscow. Protocol demanded immediate retaliation, launch on warning, start World War III. But something didn't feel right. He disobeyed direct orders, betting 7 billion lives on a hunch. He was right. It was a false alarm. And this story, classified for over 40 years. What you're about to hear are 7 declassified incidents. 7 moments when we stood at the edge of nuclear annihilation. 7 times when the fate of humanity rested in the hands of people whose names you've never heard. These aren't Hollywood stories. These are government documents that were kept secret for 50 years. If you want to know how close we really came to the end of everything, hit that subscribe button right now, because this is going to change how you see history. Let's begin. Incident number 1. The man who saved the world. Stanislav Petrov. September 26th, 1983. Just after midnight, the Serpukhov 15 bunker south of Moscow. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sits at his console monitoring the Soviet Union's early warning satellite system, codename OKO. His job is simple: detect incoming nuclear missiles from the United States. Tonight, he's filling in for a colleague who called in sick. The timing couldn't be worse. 3 weeks earlier, the Soviet military shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, a civilian aircraft that strayed into Soviet airspace. All 269 people aboard were killed, including a U.S. congressman. Relations between the superpowers have never been more toxic. The Americans are furious, the Soviets are paranoid, and in just 11 days, NATO will conduct a military exercise so realistic that Soviet leadership will genuinely believe World War III has begun. At 12:14 a.m., Petrov's screen lights up. Red letters flash. Launch. The system detects one intercontinental ballistic missile heading toward the Soviet Union from the United States. Then another alarm, a second missile, then a third, fourth, fifth. The computer calculates the reliability of the detection at the highest level possible, a perfect 3. The protocol is crystal clear. Notify his superiors immediately. They would have less than 20 minutes to order a retaliatory strike. Launch on warning. That was Soviet doctrine. But Petrov hesitates. Something doesn't add up. If the United States was launching a first strike, why only 5 missiles? America had thousands. This made no strategic sense. A real attack would come in massive waves, hundreds of missiles designed to obliterate the Soviet Union's ability to respond. The satellite system was new, untested, prone to errors. Ground radar showed nothing. But ground radar might be too late. Petrov picks up the phone. His hand is shaking. In his own words, years later, he would confess, "I wasn't sure, not until the very last moment. I knew perfectly well that nobody would be able to correct my mistake if I had made one." He reports it as a false alarm. Minutes pass like hours. No missiles strike Soviet cities. No nuclear fireballs consume Moscow. Petrov was right. Later investigation revealed the truth. Sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds over North Dakota at a precise angle had fooled the satellite sensors. A rare alignment. A cosmic coincidence. Had Petrov followed protocol, Soviet leadership would have launched a retaliatory strike. The United States would have responded. Europe would have been vaporized. The nuclear winter that followed would have killed billions more. Stanislav Petrov prevented the end of human civilization, and his reward? He was reprimanded for not properly documenting the incident, never promoted again. The Soviet government buried the story. For decades, no one knew his name. He died in 2017 at age 77 in a small apartment outside Moscow. Only in 2013 did he receive the Dresden Peace Prize. When asked if he considered himself a hero, Petrov said simply, "It was my job. I was simply doing my job." But here's the terrifying truth. In a 2013 interview, Petrov admitted he was never truly certain the alarm was false. He made a 50-50 judgment call and got it right. One man, one decision, 7 billion lives. Incident number 2, the submarine that almost fired, Vasily Arkhipov. Let's rewind to October 27th, 1962, the same day, the Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days that nearly ended the world. You know the story, or you think you do. President Kennedy's televised addresses, the dramatic UN Security Council confrontation, the tense negotiations, Khrushchev backing down. But what you don't know is what was happening 300 feet below the ocean's surface. The Soviet Union deployed 4 Foxtrot-class submarines to Cuba in October 1962, each carrying 22 torpedoes. What American intelligence didn't know, what couldn't have known, was that one of those torpedoes on each submarine was special, nuclear. With the power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, submarine B-59 had been at sea for weeks. They'd sailed from above the Arctic Circle through Hurricane Ella into tropical waters. The submarine, designed for cold northern seas, had become a floating oven. Temperatures inside reached 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The air was so thick with carbon dioxide that crew members were collapsing. Some were passing out from heat exhaustion. And for 3 days, they'd lost all contact with Moscow. Now, 11 U.S. Navy destroyers and the aircraft carrier USS Randolph had B-59 surrounded. They were dropping practice depth charges, small explosives designed to force the submarine to surface for identification. But no one had told the Soviet crew these were practice charges. To Captain Valentin Savitsky and his men, dying from heat and oxygen deprivation, these explosions meant only one thing: war had begun. In the suffocating darkness, Captain Savitsky lost his composure. His exact words, later recounted by Naval Intelligence Officer Vadim Orlov: "Maybe the war has already started up there. We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not disgrace our Navy." He ordered the nuclear torpedo prepared for launch. On most Soviet submarines, only 2 officers needed to authorize a nuclear launch: the captain and the political officer. Both agreed. The order was given. But submarine B-59 was different. Because Vasily Arkhipov, brigade chief of staff, was aboard, Soviet protocol required a 3rd signature. 3 officers had to unanimously agree. In the chaos, with men screaming, explosions reverberating through the hull, the heat unbearable, Arkhipov refused. An argument erupted. Imagine 300 feet underwater, surrounded by American warships, crew members unconscious, the captain convinced World War III has already started, demanding permission to fire a weapon that would vaporize an aircraft carrier and trigger nuclear Armageddon. And one man says no. Arkhipov had faced nuclear disaster before. Just a year earlier, he'd been aboard K-19, the Soviet submarine whose reactor suffered a catastrophic meltdown at sea. He'd watched men die from radiation poisoning. He knew what nuclear weapons truly meant. He made his case. If war had really started, why were the Americans wasting resources on a single diesel submarine? They would either destroy B-59 immediately or ignore it. This was something else, a test, a signal. Arkhipov convinced Savitsky to surface and request orders from Moscow. As B-59 broke the surface, Captain Savitsky looked out at the American destroyers surrounding them and saw a jazz band playing on the deck of one ship. The USS Coney was signaling by flashing light, "Do you need assistance?" Not exactly signs of World War III. B-59 eventually made it back to the Kola Peninsula. The nuclear torpedo remained unfired. But here's what makes this truly terrifying. The incident remained completely unknown for 40 years. The Americans had no idea they'd come within minutes of nuclear war. The world had no idea. It wasn't until a conference in Havana in 2002, 40 years later, that the truth finally emerged. Former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, upon learning what really happened that day, said, "We came very, very close to nuclear war, closer than we knew at the time." Historian Arthur Schlesinger Jr. called it the most dangerous moment in human history. Vasily Arkhipov never spoke about the incident, not even to his wife. He died in 1998, largely unknown. In 2017, the Future of Life Institute posthumously awarded him their inaugural Future of Life Award. His daughter accepted it. She said her father never told his family what happened. It was classified, secret information. One man, one refusal, 7 billion lives. The question that haunts me, what if Arkhipov hadn't been aboard B-59 that day? What if standard protocol had applied? What would our world look like now? We'll never know. Because that world doesn't exist. If you're finding this as mind-blowing as I did researching it, do me a favor and leave a comment right now with the word "survived." Let's see how many of us are grateful we're still here. And hit that like button because we're only getting started. Incident number 3, the bear that almost started World War III. 2 incidents, 2 Soviet officers, 2 decisions that rewrote human history. But the Cold War wasn't just defined by moments of clarity and courage. Sometimes the threat came from sheer incompetence, human error, technology failures, and sometimes it came from a bear. October 25, 1962, Duluth, Minnesota. Volkfield Air Force Base, it's 11:30 p.m. A security guard at Duluth Sector Direction Center sees a figure climbing the perimeter fence. An intruder. On the most dangerous night of the Cuban Missile Crisis, he triggers the alarm. Instantly, alarms sound across multiple Air Force bases. But there's a problem. A wiring error causes the wrong alarm to activate at Volkfield. Instead of the sabotage alarm, the nuclear war alarm begins blaring. The klaxon. The sound that means World War III has begun. Scramble all aircraft immediately. Pilots at Volkfield sprint to their F-106A interceptors. These aircraft are armed with nuclear-tipped air-to-air missiles. Their orders are clear. In the event of nuclear war, intercept Soviet bombers over Canada and shoot them down with atomic weapons. The pilots have been explicitly told there would be no practice drills tonight. So when that alarm sounds, they fully believe, that nuclear war has started. Engines roar. Aircraft begin taxiing toward the runway. The base commander desperately tries to contact Duluth to confirm the order. Finally, he gets through. There is no Soviet bomber attack. There is no nuclear war. There is a bear. Just a bear. Probably looking for food. At Volk Field, an officer jumps into his car and races onto the runway, flashing his lights frantically, signaling the pilots to abort takeoff. The interceptors stop. The nuclear-armed aircraft do not launch. But here's the terrifying part. Those F-106 pilots had no idea about Operation Chrome Dome, the classified program where Strategic Air Command kept nuclear-armed B-52 bombers flying continuous patrol routes. Some of those routes crossed the very airspace where the F-106 would have been hunting for Soviet bombers. Declassified Air Defense Command documents later revealed the real danger. American nuclear-armed interceptors could have accidentally shot down American nuclear-armed bombers. A friendly fire incident with nuclear weapons. The Pentagon's response? They changed the alarm system so a bear couldn't trigger World War III again. One bear, one wiring error, 1 minute from disaster. Incident number 4, the computer that cried wolf. Fast forward to June 3rd, 1980. The Cold War has entered a new phase. Satellite systems, computer networks, automated early warning systems designed to detect nuclear launches in seconds. Progress, technology. What could go wrong? At 2:26 a.m., NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, receives an alert. Their computers detect 220 Soviet submarine-launched ballistic missiles heading toward the United States. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski is awakened with the news. He's moments away from calling President Carter to recommend a nuclear counterattack, but he hesitates. He asks for confirmation. Seconds later, the number changes. Not 220 missiles, only 200 missiles. The Pentagon convenes a threat assessment conference. Nuclear bomber crews start their engines. Missile crews open their safes and retrieve launch codes. The National Emergency Airborne Command Post, the Doomsday Plane, begins preparing for takeoff. This is it. The Soviets have launched. Time to decision, minutes. Brzezinski is reaching for the phone to call President Carter when fresh data arrives. Command centers disagree with the satellite data. Radar sites show nothing. No missiles, no attack. False alarm. Later investigation revealed what happened. A technician at NORAD had accidentally loaded a training simulation into the live system. A drill tape simulating a Soviet attack had been run through the real early warning network. An accident, a simple mistake. Soviet General Secretary Leonid Brezhnev personally wrote to President Jimmy Carter, calling the false alarm fraught with tremendous danger. He was right to be concerned. Because in the months that followed, there were 3 more false alarms at NORAD, 3 more instances where computer chips malfunctioned and indicated Soviet missiles were incoming. One of those false alarms forced the National Emergency Airborne Command Post, the Flying Pentagon, to taxi into position at Andrews Air Force Base, preparing for nuclear war. U.S. State Department advisor Marshall Schulman put it bluntly, "False alerts of this kind are not a rare occurrence. There is a complacency about handling them that disturbs me." Between 1977 and 1985, NORAD held over 20,000 first-stage conferences over potential missile launch alerts. Over 1,000 went to second-stage threat evaluation. 6 reached the third and final stage of threat assessment. Think about that. 6 times in 8 years, NORAD reached the highest level of nuclear alert because of computer errors. 1 faulty training tape, 1 computer chip failure, 1 line of code, Any of them could have ended everything. Incident number 5. The satellite that mistook sunlight for missiles. Here's the thing about technology during the Cold War. Both sides were building systems faster than they could properly test them. The race to develop early warning satellites was desperate, frantic, and sometimes deeply flawed. October 28, 1962. The Cuban Missile Crisis is still raging. The Laredo radar warning site in Texas has just become operational, brand new, state-of-the-art. Suddenly, the system detects 2 missiles flying over Georgia, heading north, Soviet ICBMs. The alarm goes up the chain of command, but there's confusion. The National Command Post misidentifies the warning as coming from the Moorestown Post, a much more reliable installation. This makes the threat seem more credible. Preparations begin to intercept the incoming missiles. Then someone checks the Moorestown data. Moorestown detected nothing. Because there were no missiles. The Laredo system, so new, so untested, had mistaken an orbiting satellite for incoming nuclear warheads. The issue was quietly resolved. No missiles were launched. No public announcement was made. But this raises a question. How many other times did early warning systems malfunction? How many false alarms were there that never made it into the historical record? We know about this one only because it happened during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when everything was being documented obsessively. The Soviets had similar problems. Declassified Russian documents reveal that malfunctions of their early warning systems were not rare. But the secretive Soviet state was always reluctant to let such information out. How close did we come to nuclear war because a computer mistook clouds for missiles, satellites for ICBMs, weather phenomena for a first strike? We'll never know the full count. What we do know is this. We built machines to make split-second decisions about the end of the world, and then we gave those machines data they couldn't properly process. One software glitch, one optical illusion, one unintended consequence. Incident number 6, the NATO exercise that terrified the Kremlin. November 1983. The Cold War is at its most intense since Cuba. Ronald Reagan is in the White House calling the Soviet Union an evil empire. The Soviets are paranoid, deeply paranoid, and they have reason to be. In May 1981, KGB Chief Yuri Andropov, soon to become General Secretary, launched Operation Ryan, the largest Soviet intelligence collection effort of the entire Cold War. Its purpose? To detect signs that the United States was preparing a nuclear first strike. Think about that. Soviet leadership genuinely believed America might launch a surprise attack to decapitate the USSR before they could respond. They ordered KGB officers around the world to watch for warning signs. Increased lights at government buildings late at night. Blood banks being stocked. Unusual military communications. The Soviets were looking for evidence that the West was planning a nuclear Pearl Harbor. Then came November 1983. NATO launched a military exercise called Able Archer 83. On paper, it was routine. A command and control exercise testing NATO's procedures for launching nuclear weapons. But Able Archer 83 was different. It used new communication systems the Soviets hadn't seen before. It involved high-level officials in a way previous exercises hadn't. And the simulated scenario was eerily realistic. NATO responding to a Soviet invasion of Western Europe by authorizing nuclear release. KGB officers across Europe sent frantic reports back to Moscow. NATO is behaving oddly. Communications are encrypted differently. This doesn't look like a normal exercise. Soviet leadership began to believe Able Archer 83 wasn't an exercise at all. They thought it was cover for an actual nuclear first strike. Soviet forces went on high alert. Nuclear-capable aircraft in East Germany and Poland were loaded with live weapons and placed on heightened readiness. We were minutes away from a catastrophic miscalculation, but there was one problem, or rather one salvation. A KGB officer named Oleg Gordievsky was a double agent, secretly working for British intelligence. He informed MI6 that Soviet paranoia was genuine. They truly believed NATO might attack. British intelligence briefed Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher. She was shocked. She immediately ordered British officials to urgently approach the Americans and explain that the Soviets were seriously misinterpreting NATO's intentions. The exercise concluded without incident, but it was close, terrifyingly close. It wasn't until 1990, 7 years later, that American intelligence officials acknowledged how close Able Archer 83 had come to triggering nuclear war. Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev later reflected, "Never perhaps in the post-war decades has the situation in the world been as explosive as in the first half of the 80s. Paul Dibb, former director of the Australian Joint Intelligence Organization, put it even more bluntly. Able Archer could have triggered the ultimate unintended catastrophe. One military exercise. One misunderstanding. One intelligence report from a double agent that changed everything." Before we get to the final incident, I want to ask you something. If you've made it this far, you're clearly the kind of person who wants to know the truth about history. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because I dig into declassified documents and forgotten stories like this every single week. Your support keeps this channel going. Now, let's talk about the incident that almost vaporized Arkansas. Incident number 7. The missile that went missing. September 18th to 19th, 1980, Damascus, Arkansas. A Titan II missile silo. The Titan II was America's most powerful ICBM, a liquid-fueled monster capable of delivering a 9-megaton nuclear warhead. For comparison, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. This was 9,000 kilotons, 600 times more powerful. Senior Airman David Powell is performing routine maintenance inside the silo. It's tedious work in a cramped space. He's standing on a platform 70 feet above the missile. Then he drops a socket wrench. The wrench falls. It bounces off the platform. It tumbles through the air, and it punctures the missile's fuel tank. Instantly, toxic, highly explosive rocket fuel begins filling the silo. The crew evacuates. Specialists are called in. For hours, they try to stabilize the situation. But at 3 a.m. on September 19th, the inevitable happens. The rocket fuel explodes. The blast is so powerful, it tears the 740-ton silo door off its hinges and hurls it 200 yards through the air. The 9-megaton nuclear warhead is ejected from the silo. It lands in a ditch, unexploded. One Air Force member was killed in the explosion. 21 others were injured, but the nuclear warhead did not detonate. This incident became the cornerstone of Eric Schlosser's book, Command and Control: Nuclear Weapons, the Damascus Accident, and the Illusion of Safety. When Schlosser filed a Freedom of Information Act request to learn more about nuclear accidents in the United States, he received a document that ran 245 pages covering just 10 years of the Cold War. Dozens of incidents, weapons dropped by accident, planes crashing with nuclear bombs aboard, near detonations, launch failures, safety system malfunctions. In 1961, a B-52 bomber broke apart over North Carolina. It was carrying 2 nuclear bombs, each with a yield of 3.8 megatons. One bomb's parachute deployed correctly, the other hit the ground at terminal velocity. Later investigation found that 5 of the 6 safety mechanisms designed to prevent accidental detonation had failed. Only one single switch, kept that bomb from exploding. If it had detonated, it would have created a radioactive crater and fallout zone covering much of the East Coast. A former head of U.S. Strategic Command, upon learning about the 2007 incident where nuclear weapons were accidentally flown from North Dakota to Louisiana and left unguarded for 36 hours, said, "I have been in the nuclear business since 1966 and am not aware of any incident more disturbing." The terrifying truth is this: nuclear weapons are not safe. The systems designed to control them are not foolproof. Human beings make mistakes. Technology fails. And during the Cold War, we built enough nuclear weapons to destroy human civilization dozens of times over. And then we placed those weapons in the hands of fallible systems operated by fallible people. One dropped wrench, one malfunctioning switch, one accident. Closing. 7 incidents, 7 moments when the world stood at the edge of oblivion. Stanislav Petrov, trusting his gut over his computer. Vasily Arkhipov, refusing to authorize a nuclear torpedo launch. A base commander racing onto a runway to stop fighter jets scrambled by a bear. Brzezinski hesitating just long enough to avoid nuclear war triggered by a training tape. Radar systems mistaking satellites for missiles during the Cuban Missile Crisis. NATO nearly provoking a Soviet first strike with a military exercise. A dropped wrench that almost vaporized Arkansas. These are just the incidents we know about, the ones that have been declassified. The stories that finally escaped the shadows of government secrecy. How many more are still classified? How many close calls happened that we'll never hear about? The Soviet Union kept secrets. Russia still keeps secrets. The United States keeps secrets. But here's what we do know. According to declassified documents between 1977 and 1985, NORAD experienced over 20,000 false alarm incidents requiring initial evaluation. Think about that number, 20,000. The Soviet Union suffered large numbers of major accidents with their nuclear forces, but the details remain largely unknown. Both superpowers built doomsday machines and then discovered those machines were prone to error, misinterpretation, and catastrophic failure. We survived the Cold War, not because our systems were perfect, not because our leaders were infallible, not because our technology was flawless. We survived because of individuals like Stanislav Petrov and Vasily Arkhipov. People who, in moments of unimaginable pressure, made the right call. People who hesitated when protocol demanded action. People who questioned what their instruments were telling them. We survived because of luck, coincidence, a bear instead of a saboteur, a training tape loaded at the wrong time, a wrench that could have fallen slightly differently. The nuclear weapons built during the Cold War haven't gone away. Russia still has thousands. The United States still has thousands. Other nations have joined the club. The technology is more sophisticated now. The early warning systems are better. The command and control procedures have been refined. But the fundamental danger remains the same. One malfunction, one miscalculation, one mistake. These 7 incidents were kept secret for decades, 50 years in some cases. The world never knew how close we came, but now you know. If this video opened your eyes to how fragile our existence really was during the Cold War, do me a favor. Share this video with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment telling me which incident shocked you the most. And subscribe to this channel because I uncover stories like this that they don't teach in history class. We got lucky 7 times. Let's not forget that. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.